Okay. All right, I might just get us started. Hello again. Thank you to everyone who has joined us. Welcome to our area coded series. Today's session is the second of four online webinars that we have organized in collaboration with UTP, spotlighting four amazing Western Sydney artists whose experiences span different career stages. And together, they'll highlight the unique and ever-evolving ways an artist's professional life may manifest and how this is sustained. So today, we will be hearing from a very seasoned emerging artist about their journey so far, their tips and tricks for navigating your arts practice as a small business, as well as where to start in regards to putting your work out there, and building connections with artists, arts organizations, and the broader arts community. Next slide, please. So before we dive in, NAVA acknowledges and pays respects to the rightful custodians of the many First Nations lands upon which this online event will be streamed and received. I also want to acknowledge any First Nations people currently joining us today. We recognize all custodians of country throughout all lands, waters, and territories, and pay respect to First Nations communities, ancestors, and elders. Sovereignty was never ceded. Please also feel free to drop in the chat below which country you're joining us from today. Next slide. So my name is Emma. I'm joining you from Darug Country today. I am NAVA's Professional Development Coordinator. We've also got Jane from UTP and Jill on here, both of whom you'll hear from very soon. Just some quick housekeeping reminders. This session will be live interpreted by our lovely interpreters, Erin Drummond and Therese Lewis. If you are requiring their support today, you can pin them to your screen just by clicking on the three dots in the right corner of their video. We are also live captioning today with our captioner, Dean. And please also keep in mind that today's session is being recorded. If at any point you have a question that you want to ask, if I could just please ask that you drop it in the Q&A box rather than the chat, just so that we have them all compiled in one place. We'll have some time for Q&A at the end, so we'll be answering those questions then, as well as some questions that came through when people registered. Next slide, please. Okay, so just a quick intro to NAVA for those of you who haven't heard of us before. Who are we? What do we do? NAVA stands for the National Association for the Visual Arts and is the national peak body for visual arts, craft, and design in Australia. Since 1983, we've been an influential advocate for the sector. Next slide. We're also a membership organization, bringing together the many voices that make up the contemporary arts sector to improve the fundamental conditions of work and practice. Our membership base consists of artists, arts workers, and organizations right across the country. Next slide. So this Recognize Art as Work graphic pretty much sums up the heartbeat of NAVA's work. It's affirmed across all the advocacy work we do, our education resources, and our code of practice, or the code for short. Before I go on too much further about the code, I'll just hand it over to Jane to introduce herself and the legendary work that UTP does.
Thank you so much, Emma. Hello, everyone. I'm Jane Wade. I'm a creative producer with UTP. We're a small arts organisation based on Darug Country in Bankstown, which is where I'm joining you from today. In short, we're pretty much a commissioning and producing organisation. There's kind of three areas that we focus on, with the first being open access programs. So that is like UTP Rising that we do. We do development projects like Bulungai, which will be coming up by Leanne Tobin. or we do a presentation of work based on Jarrah Country first for Western Sydney. And so that would be like earlier this year, we had the Tamilization of Ahilin Ratna Mahan showing just in RS1 in Bankstown Arts Centre. We prefer to make like long-term investments in artists and communities with that really, big focus on development and first presentation in Western Sydney for Western Sydney. And each year we're led by a provocation. I think maybe what's up here is a bit of a giveaway for it. So this year, our provocation is Who is Ready for Another World? Which considers this moment of collective grief, models of collective liberation, and resistance to settler colonialism. It comes from Rasha Abdul Hadi, a queer Palestinian Southerner, a poet, and a cultural organizer. On X, they wrote, "These are clarifying times if we're willing to pay attention. If our hearts break, let them break outwards into action. Let us practice being brave together today. We can notice if we pay attention who wants representation in empire and who is ready for another world," which I'll let that speak for itself. We've had an announcement of some of the projects that are coming up this year on our Instagram and our website, so you can go have a look at that. Thank you so much.
So exciting, Jane, and a very beautiful provocation to carry in this time. Okay, as I mentioned in our first area coded session, we're going to be mentioning the code of practice quite a bit in these sessions. As a professional artist and or arts worker, it's a really critical tool to have in your toolkit. Next slide. But first of all, what is the code? So it's an industry standard living document that helps artists and arts workers work together more equitably. So you can use the code to, one, understand what your rights and responsibilities are, two, make equitable agreements with people when making art together, and three, find out how much someone should be paid for making art or for allowing use of their art or working on projects. The code has been around since 2002 and was revised in 2022 with the help of the whole art sector who contributed their expertise, consultation efforts, and feedback. The code also reflects current concerns in the art sector around things like social justice, access, equity, and inclusion, particularly for First Nations artists. It may be referenced to guide payment negotiations, collaborative working relationships, or internal protocols within an organization. So ensuring that issues of access and inclusion are being actively worked on in all aspects of an organization. Next slide. So if you're not aware of the code already as an emerging artist, I would highly advise that you check it out or bookmark it somewhere. Even if it's just to cross-reference how much an artist fee should be or to check what should be covered in an exhibiting contract. It's very useful to have on hand. And throughout today's presentation, we'll hear some examples of how the code has enabled artists like Jill to self-advocate and make some more informed decisions on certain projects. It's completely free to access via this link, code.visualarts.net.au. So yeah, save this link somewhere, check it out. That's it for me. I'm going to throw it over to the amazing Jill to take it from here.
Thank you so much, Emma, and hi everyone. Thanks for joining me this afternoon on a Friday. I firstly want to acknowledge that I am tuning in today from Darug country. I'm very lucky to be in the UTP offices here with Emma and Jane this afternoon, which feels like a second home. So it's really nice to be here this afternoon. Thank you again for spending your Friday afternoon joining into this session. And also a very big thank you to Erin, Therese and Dean for their help throughout this session as well. The way that I've structured the presentation today, I've tried to take into account as many of those questions that were sent in early. And I know there's a couple of questions that we'll answer at the end, and you might have some questions throughout the presentation, but I've tried to do my best to answer as much as I can. I still feel like I'm an art baby, learning a lot, still so much to learn. And I think that's always a good position to kind of take, to be open to learning. But I'm really excited to kind of share, the community organisations that I've worked with, in particular in Western Sydney, that have really helped me build and develop my emerging art practice to be what it is today. So this was one of the questions. I thought this was a good starting point. It came through both parts of this question, which is, what is an emerging artist? No one seems to agree. And I kind of love this because I think, being an artist and building independent practice, whether that practice is within the arts or not, there isn't always a clear pathway or framework to follow. And I think no one art practice is the same as another. And that's something that I think is really important to remember as I kind of share my artistic practice to date. I definitely hope that a takeaway from today is thinking about the different kinds of opportunities that are available. But I am one of many, many, many emerging artists from Western Sydney. And yeah, I guess I have to kind of, I hope I can provide as much information as I can. But yeah, I am one of many. And I think a huge part of today is just to, take away some tips and tricks. But an emerging artist, I think, has probably many different definitions. You'll probably have seen many different types of definitions. Sometimes emerging opportunities have age restrictions, some don't. You're probably trying to work out, where do I fall into? And I think it's good not to feel like you're too restrained, and that you can really make of that definition what you want and what you will. I know a lot of people who are emerging practitioners maybe take a break from their art practice and then go back to being an emerging practitioner again. It's not always one, linear pathway. That it's and having an art practice is also, I think, part of who you, like, your being, or definitely part of who I am as a person. So to come and go from an art practice, or to go through periods of ebb and flow, I think are just part of the process. And so I would be gentle with having to feel like the term, the definition of what an emerging artist is, you get to prescribe, where you are in your practice. But maybe I'll be answering this a bit more throughout the presentation. I thought this was a good point to start at, and a really important report that came out and was supported by Western Sydney University, particularly because the session is called Area Coded. Some context. I grew up in Guildford in Western Sydney, and was very much close to Guildford, Merrylands and Parramatta throughout my entire life. And my work is very much grounded in those areas. And so, with working with so many Western Sydney organisations, a huge part of challenges we face, I think, comes from funding. And I think this statistic is quite stark. I didn't even realise when this came out, I didn't realise that 1 in 10 Australians live in Western Sydney. And when you look at the funding disparity, particularly from 2023 of federal funding between, of what Eastern Sydney versus Western Sydney receives, it was pretty shocking, especially when, we produce such a high quantity and quality of art in all its forms from Western Sydney. Emma and Jane, if you have anything to add while I go through these slides, please do jump in. In terms of my pathways, I might quickly go back to my high school days, and, I guess very early context. I think I always wanted to be an artist, which, obviously I didn't really understand what being an artist was when you're a kid. I just loved the creative arts, loved painting and drawing, was kind of doing it in all of my spare time. Visual arts felt like a very obvious choice when I went to high school. And then going to uni to study fine arts, I was like, that's what I'm going to do. Even though my parents and, none of my family come from an artistic background, mum is a teacher and she was really keen on me being a teacher for a long time. So I was pretty adamant about art school being the right decision, even though I really had no idea what that pathway looked like. I was not involved in high school in kind of, I don't know, any artistic programs in Western Sydney. And it wasn't really till halfway through my university degree that I started to do some programs in Western Sydney, particularly at the Arts and Cultural Exchange in Parramatta, which was the Electronic Girls program. And, you know, halfway through my degree, I really began to realize just, you know, how many small to medium organizations, community groups, incredible artists, and also peers there were at home. And that wasn't taught or really felt present in my degree. And so I really, I guess in the next slide, I really like to talk about just how big the ecosystem is of the arts in all its forms in Western Sydney. This is obviously, as it states, not an exhaustive list of all the arts organisations, but definitely is a number of them. I feel very lucky that as I look around this map, I have worked with most of these organisations, and I think, you know, it's a testament to not just about like, you know, building a career, but it's like I look at this and I'm like, oh, I have family and community members who are working or have worked and have been a part of all of these networks and all of these organizations. And so, yeah, I think this was kind of a big turning point in my art practice towards the end of my fine arts degree, where I realized, you know, I was going to be able to learn a whole lot more that felt relevant and felt more connected to who I was as a person and an artist than maybe I would learn through my university degree. Also on this list that I think is important, or sorry, who's not on this list that I think is important to mention, is that there's also, you know, an extensive performing arts community in Western Sydney. I was part of Fairfield PYT, Powerhouse Youth Theatre, for a while. Highly recommend them if you're into performing arts. There's obviously a huge literary community. I haven't had as much experience, but obviously I have attended events and have always been inspired by a lot of the writers and creatives that have worked with Sweatshop, Westwards, Giramondo Publishing. And also I want to mention We Are Studios, who are a fully disability-led inclusive studio that empowers artists with disability based in Western Sydney. So I highly recommend to screenshot this page, look up what these art organisations are doing, because this is definitely how I built my community and really built my practice, was being able to engage and work with a lot of these organisations. I thought I'd start here. This was kind of one of the first body of works that I made towards the end of my degree. I went on a residency to China, and, you know, this was kind of also the first time I feel like I had, I don't know, new worldview of like what art could be outside of the Western world in particular, and was quite formative as well in terms of just pushing my art practice, you know, making this kind of guerrilla style work where these large banners, which were kind of around the campus that I was on, were also next to these graffitis on the, like graffiti and tags on the top of rooftops. So this work in particular is kind of like a formal tag. One says Jill was here, one says crackers whack, and one says your mum looks good today. It's very early work. It's kind of cheeky, but I don't know. I really like it, and I feel like it was a really kind of important stepping stone, both like as a young person traveling overseas by myself for the first time, but also as an artist, and getting to experience art making, and also being in a studio environment with other young artists who I would never otherwise have the chance to be in conversation with. When I finished art school, I began to apply for some different opportunities. One was an open call with the Kusula Powerhouse Art Centre. And so this was an exhibition that focused entirely on sneakers and sneaker culture in Western Sydney. And so this, you know, was another kind of turning point in my practice, now I guess also reflecting on the very starting points and themes that I feel are very present in my work now, at the point that I'm at. But looking at place, also working with friends is something that I still do in my practice today. And yeah, I guess this was like an interesting starting point, walking around Parramatta specifically in these video works. After I finished art school, I also went on another residency for 3 months to Japan. And so this was the first time I had ever applied for a grant. And in terms of residencies, we can definitely get into it further on in this discussion, but I think maybe what was naive, but also what worked, was I literally just got on the web. I went on the website called Res Artistes or Res Artistes. I'll have to provide it after the session, but went on there, picked a country, was like, what residency programs have an open call? Emailed them and just went and literally just like Google mapped my way there. And I was there for a month before traveling to do a couple of other residencies whilst I was there for the 3 months in total. But this was again, like I was just finding my way through doing at this point. I was there, and I think the one of the best things about doing residencies, whether they're overseas or whether they're within your local community, is having the opportunity to engage with other artists that you might not have the opportunity to engage with otherwise. So the picture you can see here is an art and breakfast talk where members of the local community came and we had breakfast together and I did an artist talk. And that was amazing. Again, just like, I don't know, I just put myself out there and I learned a lot from the experience. And that is kind of, I guess, my takeaway from doing a lot of these really kind of early exploratory opportunities, was just being open to doing them. When I came back from Japan, I had applied for Parramatta Artist Studios in 2020, and I had my mind blown when I found out that I was accepted as part of the studio program. Parramatta Artist Studios has been running for multiple decades. I should have done my research and looked at the starting date. But I remember visiting there as a kid with my mum when I was, I think, in primary school, because it was one of the only kind of places, I think, to her knowledge, that was close to like an artist studio in the area. So to be there, 15 years later was just like mind blowing, and is such a supportive program. I, couldn't recommend more for anyone in their emerging practice to be applying to Parramatta Artist Studios. I understand that they're, going through periods of moving and finding a new location, but, any opportunity that there is, even if it's attending a program at the studios, I highly recommend going and talking to some of the artists. And there's also other studio programs that, are in Sydney. I think there's a few in Northern Sydney, or one in Bondi as well, along with the Art Space residency studio programs, which have their open call. I think it's open right now as well. But this period of time, again, was really formative because I was learning about what having a studio space meant. And that wasn't just a space to make. It really was a space that, every day I was able to be amongst other artists who, became peers and best friends, but being able to kind of knock on the door and be like, hey, what do you think about this idea? Or, can I talk to you about something? Or I guess they were kind of like incidental crit sessions, but they became really invaluable, peer mentorship sessions, which I really don't, I can't, you can't undervalue. I think when you're making, even if it is just with someone who isn't in the arts and you can kind of say, hey, can I get your thoughts on something? It's really important to have those conversations and periods of reflection to talk about your work, and get new perspectives brought in as well. During my time there, this was the first solo exhibition that I had. I applied for one with First Draft. I think I applied like 3 times, and then, four times the charm. And so this was in 2020. This was a piece of work. At the time, I was printing photographic images onto silk organza and then suspending them in the space so that you could see both, the image individually, but when you stood at either end, it began to create these kind of collective tableaus. And so this was, I guess, like me defining my way of working, which was with friends and finding a way to be both artist, friend, and director all at the one time, which can be a bit tricky when you're trying to tell your friends what to do. But it also meant that I was starting to develop a methodology or a way of working, which again, I probably didn't realize at the time, but now as I'm, expanding my practice and beginning to work maybe in a more large scale way, there are really key parts of my early practice that, are my toolkit, are my skill set, and that are really, they're like my gemstones. I really enjoy the way that looking at collective memory can help direct at work when I'm working with friends or family as key collaborators. And what I mean by that is, I might have a scene and I could do a storyboard, but I think what's more effective is I explain to them kind of how I imagine the scene happening, and then maybe there's a memory that we've all shared that I get us all to remember, and I get them to either remember a feeling or an action or something they would have said, and I kind of, cue them. And that was the way that I ended up getting actions or tableaus kind of set up, and then I would take the shot. And I think that kind of relationship with my collaborators, particularly now that I'm making work where I'm thinking about reauthoring stories, or this idea of critical fabulation, and I guess like communities reauthoring their own narratives, that became a key way to make my work. And that's kind of why this work felt like a really, again, like key moment in my practice. This was another work that I made when I was at Parramatta Artist Studios. And so I used a 360-degree camera to walk around Parramatta in the kind of very early stages of mass development. I know everyone's like, Parramatta's changed so much. And so this was like a really key part of the work, was being able to walk through Parra Mall, walk through Greenway, places that I knew weren't going to exist within 6 months. And so, I guess in this work, I was thinking about the archive, the local archive, again, what it means to be an artist that's closely connected to place, or how do we depict place in the work that we're making. This is like another kind of example of making work with friends, constructing those tableaus. This was a work that was created during lockdown, which was very challenging, but maybe the point of this is thinking about working with restrictions. And, I think another kind of part of my art practice, which I'm hoping is maybe like will never happen again in terms of a lockdown of that size. But I think being an artist, a great thing to be is responsive, to embrace unpredictability, because that is kind of the nature of how we work. It's not always going to be a very clear path, or I definitely don't work in a way where I know what I'm going to achieve and I just kind of make it happen. Like, you have to kind of go through processes and experiments and failures to finally achieve what you're wanting. And so this was like another key example of that, where I was like, okay, how are we going to make this work during lockdown? And just as the 4-person, 5-person to a place rule came in, again, applied that methodology of like recreating experiences and recreating memories came together with my friends. And then that finally kind of came together for this exhibition that again was at Casula Powerhouse. And so this is like another iteration of the photographs on silk work. I'm going to kind of stop here to talk a bit about types of artist fees, because I think this was the point where I started to make a small income from the work that I was making. And so NAVA had the reform in 2022. And so that was kind of in alignment, I guess, with this period of time for me. And, you know, again, when I was like starting to make a small amount of money and when I was beginning to kind of form my artist practice what I felt like was, I was like, oh, this is a solid career that's beginning to take place. It's not just, you know, doing just like a number of shows or experiments in public, or at one point, you know, paying for my shows and paying to exhibit all the time. The tables turned. And so NAVA really felt like a resource or a mentor in a way, that as an emerging artist in particular, you know, I didn't have a lot of family who knew at all about what being an artist was or what I should be looking out for, how to back myself as an emerging artist, particularly when it came to getting paid. And that's where the code of practice is really important, particularly the artist fee section. And something that I didn't realize was just how broad artist fees are. So you have your artist fees. It could be that there's a research and development period. If you're speaking and presenting as part of an exhibition period, you should be getting a speaking fee as well. You know, there's kind of many different ways that artists careers, you know, artists develop an income. And it's good to be talking about, because you know, obviously sometimes talking about money is uncomfortable, but when it comes to fair pay, it's really important that you know where you deserve to be paid. And this slide here also helps to kind of break down sometimes the development period. If you're at a stage where you're beginning to develop, you know, a body of work over a larger period of time, sometimes there's multiple stages and multiple parts of an artist fee. And I think this page is really great at breaking it down. So, you know, either a concept fee or a research and development period fee that helps with the, you know, the establishing of ideas. It's really your research period. Again, as an artist, I'm definitely not the type of person that just walks into the studio and makes the work and it's finished in a day or a week or a month. It really takes a lot of thinking time, and, you know, the research and development and concept fee solidifies that period. Then you have your artist fee. You know, we can get into the money side later, particularly with superannuation and that kind of thing, but obviously it's covering the other costs. Sometimes there's a materials fee as well, which covers the, you know, the practical elements if you're creating a particular type of work, like the production fee that's there. And then also the license fee, which I think is important in thinking about the longevity of your work. You know, if it's getting shown, or in particular, if an image of your work is being shown, that's where I would, take a look at NAVA, take a look at the code of practice and really familiarize yourself, just because it's such a good resource. And it's also good when you're working with anyone. For me, I've used it like as my non-existent agent, let's put it that way. Like, I can say, have you looked at the NAVA fees? They provide minimum standards. You know, it's not just me as an artist telling you that you should pay me, it's NAVA. And I think that is a really important thing to have in your toolkit. If you haven't looked at the payment standards before, this is what they look like. This is just, you know, one slither of it. So if we're looking at an emerging career, an early career artist, you can see the kind of breakdown, and it also goes into like the type of work that you're doing, whether it's an exhibition, whether it's a group show or a solo show. This is a really helpful breakdown. Maybe, Emma, this is maybe a good question for you, but when I'm trying to work out what size an organization is that I'm working with, a lot of the time, and this is probably just from experience, I kind of, I don't know, use my common sense where it's like, okay, if I'm working with an ARI, an artist run initiative, that is, community-based, community-run, they're definitely going to be like a micro-org. If I'm working with a large institution, like a state institution, they're probably going to be a large organization. Is there a way that is best to advise our listeners to determining what size organization they're working with?
Yes, that's a very good question. We have a guide in the same payment standards chapter around organization sizes. So we have certain factors like how many full-time employees they have, their annual operating budget, like how much program funding they get. And we have a table where you can sort of tick off like, oh, does this apply to my organization? And then you tally it up at the end. And then yeah, depending on how many boxes you tick, it'll determine whether you're micro, small, medium, or large. And we did touch on this in the last session as well, but if you're an artist trying to figure it out, obviously like you're not privy to that info. And that's where you kind of use like kind of what you said, like common sense or just like, like looking at their website and being like, okay, they say that they're an artist run, they're run by volunteers, that's micro. If it's a state institution, large, and then everything else, like small to medium, is where the organizations fit. But yeah, there is a guide on the code, and I can place the link in the chat if it hasn't already been pasted.
And you could also just email Nava, right? If you were really confused or really stuck and you had like an example to be able to provide for a scenario.
Yeah, for sure.
Awesome. I'm just kind of like asking these questions because I think it's important to reiterate that Nava's like, this is what Nava is for. They're there to help you with these situations. And again, back to that point of negotiating payment rates. A huge part of this is knowing your worth. And I really want to reiterate the point that, when you're kind of building an artist practice and you're new to the sector, and the sector feels like such a professional term, but, new to making, all of these are applicable to you. You don't have to reach a certain point to suddenly, be able to apply these to your work or making. Like, I think this is something that as soon as you begin to develop a practice and you're working in a professional sense, whether that's with an artist run initiative or any form of a gallery, whether that is like a, more formal institution or something that's kind of locally run, like back yourself in terms of knowing the amount of work you put in. And I think, again, just like taking time to read through Nava, see kind of like where they can support you is really important. And especially that last point of knowing when to say no. I have struggled with this a lot, especially as an emerging artist where you're like, every opportunity is valuable. But, whether you're saying no because of capacity or saying no because of your ethics or saying no because you realize halfway through it's not a safe environment, they're all really valuable things to consider, and no is just as valuable as yes in some circumstances. Jumping through a few more artworks, I'm just sprinkling them within the talk to kind of show you how I have got to the point that I'm at now. This was a group show that was at Granville Art Centre, and so this was referencing my grandparents' backyard in Merrylands, which is one suburb away from Granville. And so for this, I wanted to recreate the backyard that was in the archival photographs that I found of my family in Western Sydney back in the 60s. So we grew a live patch of grass in the gallery, which was very tricky, but I think the dying grass at the end of the exhibition felt, not too dissimilar from the very dry, dying grass of a Western Sydney summer. But yeah, this was like an interesting installation and really pushed my skills, pushed what I, was working with in terms of materials. You can see I've gone from printing on fabric to a completely different kind of installation. But then I went back, and this is an exhibition that again came through an open call. And open calls, you'll find, been through newsletters of museums. I sometimes find them on Instagram pages, but usually they get you to pull together an artist bio, an exhibition proposal. And so, maybe I'll get into this later in terms of like what you should have in your toolkit when you're applying for opportunities. But yeah, this is again like an idea that I dreamed up, and I proposed to the gallery something that was specific to both Western Sydney and to Albury, which is where Murray Art Museum is located in Albury. But yeah, this was a exhibition where I worked with both communities and community members in both cities, both suburbs. Speaking about open calls and getting started, and people might be feeling like, how do you get to exhibit, or how do you get to be in these kind of programs? And when I started, a huge part of this was just applying without a fear of rejection or a no. And that can be really intimidating and really scary. Often application forms can be quite scary. And again, that's where I would offer NAVA as a support to kind of help you maybe break down an application. And I guess the takeaway from me saying apply to everything is it took me quite a while, probably 5 years minimum, to really work out, my path or the kind of work that I wanted to be making and the types of maybe organizations that I wanted to be working with. It definitely wasn't a, knowing from the get-go kind of thing. I'm sure with any industry or any career, you kind of don't know what you're doing straight away. So I really want you to embrace, again, the ambiguity and being open to trying new things at the very start of a practice. And so particularly with applying, my kind of ethos is that just applying and just getting the application in is already a positive and is already a benefit to your practice. And that's because, one, you're developing your own skills. You're usually developing, an exhibition idea or an artwork idea, or you're pulling together your artist CV, or you're finalizing your artist statement. To me, that's all really beneficial to your practice, and you're never going to be losing from ideation. And it's also beneficial because you never know who is looking at the applications. And what I mean by that, and I'm fortunate enough to now have been an assessor for some applications through my role on the board at First Draft Artist Run Initiative. And, a huge part of not knowing, who's looking at your applications is that even though you might not get the opportunity that you're applying for, you might be really applicable for another opportunity that if there is a producer or a curator who's part of that panel and is reviewing all of these applications, they might see an idea that doesn't quite fit for what you're applying for now, but maybe it's absolutely relevant to like the exhibition idea they're curating or developing. And that has kind of happened in a few instances where, I applied to a ton of things and then, someone's like, I saw your application for this a while ago. Where is that idea at? It'd be great to kind of start a conversation because, what I'm doing right now, what I'm developing feels like there's some synergy and some relevance. So yeah, I always think just applying and throwing yourself in the pool is like giving you already a ton of experience and is never going to like not be beneficial in one way or another. The other thing that I think really helped at the early stage of my emerging career is also just spending time in my community. A big part of that is obviously like dedication to go to exhibition openings or public programs. It doesn't mean that you have to be like out every single night or weekend seeing shows, but I think just showing up and being able to introduce myself and to meet friends, to meet people who are now really close collaborators was really key to then, developing work later on. And it also, again, it kind of sparked a lot of those interesting opportunities where I then wanted to make a work later on, and then I was like, oh, I remember, that animator that I met. I'll invite them to be part of my work, or we could kind of start thinking about an idea that we could work on collaboratively. It's important to think about, I think, how you're contributing to an ecosystem or how you're part of a community, as opposed to it just being you versus, the world, or I don't know, moving away from the individual way of thinking, I think, is important and is a more realistic way of working, particularly in Western Sydney, where, so many of our art organizations, as I said at the start, they feel like family. And a huge part of that, comes from just spending time hanging out and talking and showing up and supporting. That's a huge part of the way I've worked in particular. And I think finally, I'm reading my notes, but it requires commitment and hard work. And I understand that commitment and hard work looks very different for everyone. But that's kind of, I don't know, been my ethos of, if I have to work hard, I have to work hard to do anything, whether that's working in retail or, being an artist or working in finance. Like, no matter what you do requires hard work. It requires you to, get up out of bed. It requires you to still make time for family. And so I think I was like, if I'm going to work hard, I'm going to work hard at something that I'm passionate about. But also being very aware that I was not going to be successful overnight, and that everything takes time and it requires persistence. So I don't know, maybe this is more of a TED Talk moment, but I don't know, they're key values that I think I have been a part of my emerging practice. Another kind of public program that's very different from anything else that was part of my early practice is a project called Chainmail the Label. And so this is a streetwear label that I created with one of my best friends. And I wanted to mention this because we learned a lot of skills through this project that I think are applicable both to my art practice, but also to the other kinds of work that I do, which I'll mention a bit later. But this was a streetwear project where we would release a limited edition number of items, and we had a launch where the items would be for sale. And a big part of the launch was being able to engage and have Western Sydney musicians play music. We also work with Western Sydney designers for our labels, Western Sydney photographers to capture the event. And so the last one that happened in 2022, the event was held at a car park in Guildford. And so sometimes I look back and I'm like, whoa, this was like a guerrilla kind of art activity. And at the time, you kind of are just working with the resources that you have. We weren't setting out to develop a brand to make money. We were developing a project where, it was made for and by the Western Sydney community. We usually just sold enough to cover our expenses. So it was kind of like a self-funded project. But yeah, they were really memorable events, and people did rock up, especially to this last one, which was, kind of terrifying because we just sent out the location on the day, which was a car park, and sold the clothes from the boot of our car and pulled out a rug onto one of the car spots, hooked up the songs for the musicians to the car amp or the Bluetooth and just cranked it. And that was our speaker. And so there's a picture there of Witchings, Jenny, who's from Western Sydney. She performed, which is also amazing because, Jenny has had such an incredible, career that continues to develop. And it's amazing to kind of feel again like we're working with our peers and we're all consistently chipping away at our practices. Sorry, I've jumped around a bit. This is the second half of that Albury Mama show. These were some archival images because I also really love taking film photos. But the point of, I think, both the Chainmail project and the Albury project is to get to this part of what NAVA can assist with, which is community engagement and community engagement fees. And this is not going to be listed as explicitly as the other artist fees for many different reasons. It more so provides a guideline for if you are working with community members and if you are kind of creating work that sits within a social practice, what fees are appropriate. And, that even for me has kind of varied where I obviously want to always be able to pay the people that I'm working with, but sometimes if you're working with friends or family members, they might be like, why are you paying me? Or maybe it almost feels a bit rude to be paying them. So maybe it's about, providing lunch or paying them in other ways or returning a favor, which again, I think changes project to project, but are just kind of different ways that I've found community engagement and community engagement fees to change in the type of work. Obviously, the level of participation is also different, along with like their input. And I think a huge part of community engagement comes down to listening, developing the relationship. You're obviously spending time with the people that you want to work with, finding out what they're comfortable with. And it's through those processes that you'll be able to determine what is right for each project. And again, like I'm not the one kind of like speaker on behalf of community engagement. There's many incredible artists who work with community, but this is just my experience of like how I've worked with family and friends. And yeah, it's always good to kind of refer to this NAVA page to kind of guide you in the right direction. But, you can always ask the Western Sydney community organisations if you're in contact with them or some other artists who might have a social practice. I think it's always beneficial to kind of reach out and ask questions. The worst you'll get is like, sorry, I can't assist, I guess. I'll quickly kind of jump through these, but I just wanted to mention a few other kind of artistic projects that have really, benefited and changed and impacted my practice. And I'm not just mentioning UTP because this is supported by UTP. I think it's also because these are like hands down some of the most amazing projects that I've been a part of. 15 Cigarettes in particular, which was about 15 cigarettes being the same impact as loneliness. This was, coming out of COVID. And so, this was a really amazing opportunity to be able to work intergenerationally in a really slow way as well over a year or so. And, a lot of this project felt, again, like listening and understanding, and it wasn't something where the outcome was determined before the project was developed. And it really introduced a different way of working for me and brought me closer to community, the Arab and the Lebanese community that I'm part of. And a huge shout out to Eddie Abd, who is the producer on this project and who, delivers the kind of work that I've been a part of with so much care, which is, again, like then things that I get to learn from and kind of incorporate into the kind of work that I want to make. Encounter Flows, that was another UTP project, also partly led by Eddie. And this was an opportunity to go to the Sharjah Biennale in 2023 with a cohort of artists from both Sydney and Melbourne, all who had connections to the Southwest Asia, North Africa region. And this, again, was a really groundbreaking opportunity that I think forged a path for me to head on in the last few years of my practice in particular. And I kind of note all these opportunities and these artworks as key moments because I think, again, not that I've been developing my practice blindly, but it's definitely about understanding my practice or what I want from my practice step by step, as opposed to being like, I want to be here in 5 years. Like, I'm not going to be a part of anything if it's not going to benefit my 5-year plan. It's about being able to kind of step by step work out what's working, what's not working, how does it make me feel, reflecting on my practice, and then kind of making decisions and, again, embracing that ambiguity and that uncomfortableness that sometimes comes with an independent practice. This was a project, I'm going to quickly speak to both collaboration and insurance. But this was a work that I made with Callan J. Deer, who's another Western Sydney emerging artist, along with Emma Pham, who is in this call and who I treasure very much as a peer and another emerging artist. And so this was a public artwork, my first ever time working with public art, which was a whole learning experience. But a part of this project needed public liability insurance when it came to installing this work on the footpath in Auburn. And that is where my NAVA insurance came into play. We also worked with high school students, so we needed working with children check. So that's kind of like just another kind of key factor of thinking about the administrative side of being an artist. I'll quickly jump to the insurance page. I won't kind of, go into too much detail about the specific layers of insurance and what they meant and how they were used, but knowing that I had my NAVA insurance meant that I could send all the documents to Auburn Council and to the Cumberland City Council, everyone who needed them, and I was covered when making this artwork. Emma, I'm not sure if there's anything to add to NAVA insurance, but I will hand it over to you if you have anything to add.
Yeah, I can jump in here just to quickly plug NAVA's Premium Plus membership, and just to tell you a little bit about how it's tailored more to artists and arts workers. So as part of the NAVA Premium Plus membership, which is the pink box that you see, we offer a heavily discounted insurance package. And as Jill said, insurance is an essential part of sustaining professional practice, because it provides protection for artists and arts workers against a range of risks that can come up when you're making art. So, for example, artists are often required to have their own insurance to participate in things like exhibiting, residencies, creating works in public spaces, workshops, and many more. And similarly, if you're an arts worker, like a curator or installer, you'll find that public and professional indemnity is often compulsory when working as an independent contractor. So having insurance that is easily accessible and affordable for artists is something that we've always strived for. So just want to put that out there.
And something that I'd like to flag about this, like I definitely wasn't paying for a NAVA, membership because I couldn't afford it in the very kind of start of my emerging practice. And I felt that there was enough free resources that NAVA supplied for me at the very early stages of my career. It's only kind of in recent years where I've either needed it for very specific projects or, I have developed a career where it felt important to be able to, have the membership and the kind of benefits and again toolkit that came with it. So it doesn't need to always be like an urgent thing, but I think knowing that you have NAVA's free resources is like step one, really important. And then when you get further into your emerging career, maybe closer to mid-career, considering maybe a NAVA membership and those benefits as well. This was a work that is pretty much my most recent work to date, Leave Your Shoes at the Door. This was released and screened as part of the Create New South Wales Artspace Emerging Artists Fellowship that I was a part of and I was the recipient of last year. This was a really exciting work because, again, it felt like a culminative point of my practice and all the work and the systems, the pedagogy, the ways of working that I had put into place. It also featured friends, family, and a lot of places that had featured in my work before, which, maybe that speaks to not being afraid of revisiting spaces or, revisiting ideas just because you might have, captured them a few years ago. And so this was the work installed at Artspace. This was the first time that I was able to work with an install team. Before that, I was very much doing everything myself. In very early days, I remember lugging huge CRT TVs, the really old boxy ones, up and down flights of stairs in the city, and was very hands-on with the early parts of my practice. So that was a really big milestone. Even when it came to painting the walls, they were like, we have someone to do that. I was like, this is crazy. But it's, it was, again, one of those reflection points, and felt really exciting to kind of feel like this was another stage of my artist practice, and also widened my thinking about what was possible with my work. And that doesn't mean that you have to wait to do this. But I think it's exciting to think about where you think you might want to take your practice, or it's important to sketch out those ideas, do the diagrams, because you never know in a few years where you might be able to have the support to be able to kind of create the works you've always dreamed of. A part of this fellowship was also a development program, a professional development program. And this opportunity is something that I think, it's an incredible fellowship opportunity that's been running since 1997, and has, all the recipients that you look at that have, come before me, I look at, I'm like, wow, these are leading Australian artists. And so I think it's really valuable, if you're in your emerging practice, to really give this a go at applying. I don't think enough people apply. It took me like 4 goes again to even be shortlisted for the opportunity, which again just speaks to, like, you just got to keep applying. And I know it's painful sometimes, but I think the persistence is absolutely worth it. A big part of the professional development program is being able to pull together a program that is going to benefit and develop your career at the stage you're at. And this can be tricky because it is, again, a grant application. And I think this is where peers and mentors really came into play for me, because I was speaking to and about what a professional development opportunity could look like with many different peers, many different organizations for a long period of time. In particular, those first couple rounds of applications, before I felt like I had a really solid idea of what I wanted to do. And so I'll quickly talk through the public program so you can understand what I'm doing with the fellowship. But you can find more information about the fellowship online. So for my program, I wanted to go to this year's Sharjah Biennale, which is in the UAE. And for me, that was really about extending my understanding and my connections to the Middle East in particular, both, personally and for my practice, and to kind of think about Global South and the non-Western art world. And so that, again, was like a continuation of the UTP counterflows experiences and understandings that I had. 2 mentorships, one with Khaled Sabsabi and another with Joanne Sard. And then thirdly, I am developing a project with Campbelltown Arts Centre, the Arab Image Foundation in Beirut, and 4 other young emerging female artists from Western Sydney to look at image making and archiving in a kind of research-based collective program. So that's kind of what I am working on at the moment as part of this fellowship program. A few final kind of quick points that or other programs that I'll mention, which again, very different from some of the other work I've done. This was a commission by Arts and Cultural Exchange, who I mentioned at the very start of this presentation were like the first community program that I did when I was in art school. They turned 40 last year, and so they asked me to do an artist commission, which was this scarf. You'll see again, I was like, well, the models that I want to work with are people that I met in that very early electronic music program, which was Jenny Witchings, who I mentioned, and also Gemma Alana. And yeah, again, I think that's something that is in my like artist toolkit of being like, I want to continue to uplift and work with, community members from Western Sydney who've been part of my practice, and hopefully will continue to be part of my practice until we're mid-career and established artists and musicians as well. And finally, Bankstown Biennale just wrapped up at the start of this year. And so this was a 2-channel work. I worked with food and community members who were based at the Auburn Community Centre. And we were looking at food and intangible histories of recipes as a medium. And you can kind of see the kind of canvas-like setup on the left and the B-roll footage on the right. And so that was, really another exciting project that I got to work with community members, and, I was also supported by the council and the community centre to help develop this project. I have a little activity that I thought you don't have to do now, but is some homework. And this is like a little I've got to stop saying toolkit. This is like a little activity that I have found and I got told about quite a few years ago that I think is really helpful, and not many people often realise that artists have their full CV on their website. Not all artists have websites, but those who do tend to have their CV on there. So I really encourage you to find some artists that you admire and go onto their website, look at their CV, and go through their CV to see where they started their practice. And this is something that I've done to, get an understanding of where people were first exhibiting when they finished art school, or, if they didn't go to art school, where were they exhibiting, or what opportunities they were a part of. If you're, looking at more of a commercial artist practice, then this will be really beneficial, because, you can look at artists who maybe are more aligned with the practice that you have. I just find that's like such an interesting and easily accessible way to get to know artists who are doing opportunities that are available and accessible to you. It's such a, easy and practical blueprint for being able to kind of look at artists' careers and what steps they've taken. One of the questions that someone asked was about artist websites. And speaking of finding like artists' CVs on their websites, the question was about like website versus Instagram. I couldn't recommend more just having like something that exists about you outside Instagram. And maybe my opinion wouldn't have been the same like 5 or 10 years ago, but I just feel like with where Meta is heading, and it feels so unknown, it feels like sometimes, the images that you post on Instagram, you don't own. I think Instagram owns them in one way or another. So I think I really am focusing on developing my website because I want there to be an archive that I control. It's not going to change or suddenly disappear because of someone else's decision. And that isn't also like crowded by marketing and advertising and has all the kind of social media protocol and stuff surrounding it. And it also is just like, for me, the way I'm currently developing my website, it's definitely not finished. If you are like suddenly searching it right now, it's not finished. It is taking a lot of time. But, for me, it's going to be a way to archive my work and hopefully use it almost as a like a blogging space in a way, but to make sure that I like have things recorded, in particular ideas, exhibition documentation. Like you can, make your website whatever you want it to be. Some artists use it, very lightly, just as kind of a contact page, and some artists use it, as a blog or as a working space. But I always think it's valuable to have it there, and having like a way to contact you, or an email at least, as an accessible point. Very quickly, getting into the nitty-gritty, and I feel like I have to quickly say that, the things I'm about to mention, I am not a tax expert, but I'm just giving you advice on like my ways of working that hopefully are like beneficial to you all. But before I do, Emma, is there anything that you would like to add from NAVA's perspective on tax?
Not heaps. I will flag that we do have a section in the codes payment standards chapter that lays out all the tax info, but again, like we're definitely not the experts for this. We would recommend checking out ATO if you need further info on this.
Awesome. Thank you, Emma. I'm in the process of like trying to work out if I need an artist tax accountant. I have just like a normal tax accountant right now, but I know that that's what a lot of artists do, is they have a very kind of specific type of accountant, which I am trying to find more info out on. But I think just having a general understanding of tax, ensuring that you have an ABN if you are starting to receive income as part of an artistic practice is important. There's also something called tax averaging, because as a freelancer of any kind, your income's not going to be stable probably year to year. Some years are good, some years are not so good. And so tax averaging is something that is important to note, and your accountant will know more about than I will, and will be able to explain right now. But it's really important to know, I guess, like how to build a framework for your tax, for your income, for your deductions as a practitioner of any kind, not just an artist. I would have a look at all the resources that are on the NAVA website, because these really help to break down tax in an understandable way, even if it is those really, in an introductory sense and kind of pointing you in the right direction. But, I think it's important to be able to talk more openly about finances as an artist, because, again, I did not get taught any of this in art school or at uni. A lot of this was just like self-research. One of the questions that did come through was that someone was asking about a template. And so I wanted to kind of be transparent about the way that I work. I have just given a screenshot of basically my record keeping template, and I'm going to share this with Emma and Jane to be able to share with everyone afterwards. Is like a blank template, but this is basically my breakdown of how I record keep everything. You'll see down the bottom that there's like a few different tabs. I've got like my work if I'm traveling for art purposes. I've got my artist invoices, my budget for just like my living expenses, because I don't have a studio right now. I work from home. Invoices and expenses, which will become deductions, along with my pay-as-you-go tax payments that I pay throughout the year. And so basically I will list every single payment and every single income that comes into this template as it comes in, and that kind of saves me when it comes to tax time, that I don't have to like freak out and be like, oh my God, I got to do my tax. And this is something that like I definitely was like that in the early days, and it's just taken putting a few systems in place to, for lack of better words, like have my shit together. I don't know if I can swear on this, but sorry.
All good. I just want to thank Christy, who's put in the chat a recommendation for an artist accountant in Adelaide, Lauren Thiel, registered accountant and a practicing performance artist.
Amazing. Thank you so much. That is super helpful. And even like, I'm like, thank you. I will look at that afterwards. Some other recommendations as a small business, which is kind of what you are when you have your ABN and you're receiving income as an independent practitioner or an artist. And also, I thought this linked a lot to creating time. This is kind of answering a few questions that came through, but I've done a little like breakdown of kind of like, you've got your admin and your artwork practice, and they kind of need to shake hands with each other, I think, to kind of keep, to make the time to kind of keep organized is really important. It's something that has taken me a while to find out ways that work best for me. But I have found that if I have my administrative side of my art practice, along with the practical side of my art practice, when it comes to a portfolio or my artist statement or my CV all up to date, that is a way that, I don't know, creates time, because you then aren't reinventing the wheel each time you need to do an application in particular. A lot of applications will require similar information, such as an artist statement, an artist bio, a CV, and all of that, I have prepared, on file, updated regularly, so that I'm just uploading it and I know where it lives on my computer. So I really can't recommend organization more, which again, I know is kind of not everyone's forte, but I don't know, I think sometimes is worth just like, even if it's 5 minutes a day, putting away that time to keep things in check or keep things organized has been really beneficial to just being able to work efficiently. The other question that came through was about services and programs that I use as an emerging artist. And so I can be very like open about the things that I pay for in a month, just very quickly. I pay for my Google Drive storage, which is less than $5, and I pay for Adobe Photoshop. So not the whole Creative Suite, but just the photo package, which is $15 a month. And then I use like Canva for my invoices. And so I pretty much just use those 3 services in terms of like admin, organization practice. And that's kind of been a really easy way to keep things organized, but also keep things kind of cheap. And I hope that helps. Just because I think, sometimes people use, really fancy invoicing stuff, and it's like, I don't know, you don't always need that. You can even just use Word document or Google Drive, Google Docs. Another thing that's really important is your superannuation. And that's something that I am still trying to like be better at as an emerging artist, but just making sure that, you know when you should be paid super is another important thing, in that quite often you should be getting paid super as an artist. Nava has a lot of these forms, in particular, like a super form that can assist if the supplier is not providing you with a super form themselves, which might be for some of those like small to medium sectors, organizations. Again, like maybe I won't get too far into super, but I just think it's important to flag and make sure that, I don't know, you have your super fund set up. Some people pay like their own super, but often if you're working with a larger employer, then they should be giving you their super, particularly if it's like, I don't know, larger opportunities. But Emma, is there anything you want to add for super wise?
Just that, Nava always advises organizations to pay artists super on top and to budget that in, your grants that you apply for. It's not legalized yet, but it's what we recommend as good practice.
Thank you. Work-life balance is a question that has come up. I think it's come up in the chat from what I can see, but it also came up as a lot of like previous questions about how do you find time, and with time also comes like many jobs and trying to live, and I've pretty much throughout my entire young adult life and early practice have worked multiple jobs. I started as a dog walker, then I worked in retail, then I worked as an art assistant. I worked some jobs as a creative producer at Arts and Cultural Exchange. So again, like building on the connections that when I first started out as a participant with some organizations in Western Sydney. And then more recently, I applied for a job as a curator at the Powerhouse Museum. And when I mentioned Chainmail before, that event with the street label, like I think a lot of those projects kind of gave me skills that I didn't see as like professional development or like CV worthy, but I talked about them in my interview, and I talked about a lot of the work that I develop in my art practice and the projects that I develop. And you'll probably find that there are a lot of applicable skills that you can apply to all different kinds of work. And so, as an artist, you're wearing many different hats a lot of the time, whether that's producing, making, thinking, communicating, administrative skills, tax skills. Like there are so many hats that you wear that it's important to, not underplay all the skills that you do have. And I guess I'm just like saying that to kind of show the progression of the different kinds of work that I've done in addition to my art practice. And in terms of like, there have been times when I've worked, like a full-time job, a part-time job, and an art practice. And now I have just reached a point where I am working a part-time curatorial practice and I have a part-time art practice. And that's probably the first time ever where I've had like this much time to dedicate to an art practice, which is really exciting. But it's definitely taken a lot of dedicated after hours and weekend work to get to this point. And that's going to be different for every single person. And I really want to reiterate that, I understand everyone's circumstances are very different. There definitely can't be like one way of dedicating studio time. I'm not going to give the key advice because it might not be applicable to you, but I guess I've just found ways of making it work. And I guess that's because I said to myself, I'm never not going to be an artist. It's always going to be a part of me, a part of who I am. And so I'm just going to make it work as best I can. And I'm still figuring out how it works, what it looks like. But I think, again, some of those like organizational skills that I've kind of put in place have helped me not spend so much time like focusing on them, and instead that's been able to allow me to make more time for thinking and making. And that changes, the thinking and making changes all the time. I'm not always like super productive every time I have a studio day, or sometimes I'm like, oh my god, I'm working overtime because I've got it all in my head and I like want to get it out onto paper. So it ebbs and flows, and I think it's okay to know that it ebbs and flows, and it has to work with, being able to afford rent and like put food on the table. Like all of those things are valid. And so, yeah, it's important to find a practice and a way of working that works for you as well. And for me, it's going to continuously change, I'm sure, as I like have different things going on in my life, or if I have kids, like it's all going to, change. And maybe that's part of just being able to be responsive and going with the ambiguity, or as Bruce Lee would put it, like be water. The water's in the cup, you become the cup. The water's in the bucket, you become the bucket. Yeah, that's my advice. This was just a page very quickly on arts worker wages, just because I did mention about some of the other jobs that I had, which are still in the art sector. And a lot of artists also work in the art sector, whether they're producers or curators or, I don't know, program curators. Like there's so many different types of working, and it's good to know that NAVA also covers this. Look, there's even like retail manager in there. I'm like, wow, NAVA offers so much detail. Sometimes I didn't even realize. But it's great to know that these are also some guidelines that are helpful for not just your artistic practice, but other kinds of arts working practices. Emma, any more additions there, or should I move on?
Happy for you to move on. Maybe I'll just mention that, again, it's not an exhaustive list because there are some occupations that I can think of right now that aren't listed here. But the best thing is to just find the one that is most similar to your role if it's not on this table, and then just tailor the fee according to your circumstances.
I am conscious that we're very close to time, but hopefully we have a few minutes to both wrap up, but also to answer maybe some burning questions that have been coming through the chat that maybe I haven't answered. I hope that I have answered a lot of your questions and like provided some valuable information. I feel like I've just been like blabbing at you for like an hour, but yeah, hopefully it's been helpful.
It has been very helpful, Jill, and I think you've answered Shelley's question about the admin studio time split. It's just hard to provide a definite answer. And my colleague Donna has been answering some of the questions that came through in the Q&A. So thank you, Donna. Michelle asked, are you fully financially viable as an artist, or do you have a day job on the side to support your financial needs? I think you already touched on that, Jill.
Yeah, and like maybe just to quickly reiterate, so like, yeah, I have been working full time for the last 3 years. And with that, like, I moved out of home for the first time. Like my financial situation has changed, which meant that it, wasn't viable to just like have a studio practice and have a part-time job. It was like having to work full time, but now it's like changed to being part-time art, part-time curator. But yeah, it constantly changes, and sometimes art feels really viable, sometimes it doesn't. But I don't know. I'm like just committed to finding out what can happen from here, and I think that's an exciting part of being in an emerging part of your practice.
Amazing. I think all the questions have been answered. Maybe I'll just throw one in that we got sent from the registration forms, which is, and I'm not sure if you specifically touched on this, but if you do, then let me know. But how do you manage or navigate choosing the right opportunities for you and your practice to thrive?
That's a great question. And I think, throughout the way that I've been talking about the different opportunities that I've had, at the start I was like 100% applying for like everything and anything just because I was trying to gain the experience of both installing and, developing an exhibition or an idea, like being able to test what some ideas or, artworks might look like. And then, the point of kind of mentioning some of those key like artworks or key opportunities was to kind of, I guess, show a more defined pathway or like direction. And yeah, I guess it's only kind of now, which, even though I'm still, I guess, at the like end of an emerging practice, but I am like, I guess, five-ish years in, only now do I feel like I'm like, oh, okay, I can kind of, I know what my art practice is more about, even though some of it's still like super ambiguous. And I know that I'm the kind of artist that I'm like not sticking to one medium. And that's fine. That took a long time to kind of come to terms with. But I do have a sense of like, the type of work I want to make, or I don't know, the type of residencies or places that I want to travel, or the type of curators I want to work with. But that's only come from trial and error, research, conversations, listening, and also, yeah, spending time with other artists and looking at other art and looking at other art forms. It doesn't just have to be art, like I love looking at food. Food inspires me in many different ways. You could be into music, you could be into whatever. Let it all inspire you. And that I think will, be reflective in your practice and the kind of work you make.
That's a great answer. Definitely, yeah, don't be afraid to take your time before you figure out what the right opportunities are for you. I'm just conscious of time. Might just leave it there for questions. Yeah, since I think most of them have been answered. But if your question didn't get answered, like feel free to send us an email and we can send it through to Jill as well at the end.
Yeah, super happy to help in any way I can. Just feel free to email and I will respond. But I will look, the way I wanted to wrap up today as well, I've mentioned it a few times that like, this is just like one emerging artist experience. I really wanted to just like highlight a few other emerging artists and peers who I've worked with or who have been part of my community who I recommend that you also take a look at. So Eddie Abt, who again is one of the producers that I've worked with at UTP, I got to meet because we first had our first ever solo exhibitions at First Draft Gallery. We were like next to each other, found out we were both Lebanese and, have been friends ever since, have worked with each other in many different ways. And I think there were a few questions about like mature age artists, how they develop work, how you develop work when you have kids or develop a practice when you have kids. And, Eddie is also a phenomenal example of being maybe at a different point in your life and developing a practice. So would definitely look out for Eddie's work. Sheila Knock-Pham, so Sheila, who's also from Western Sydney. So Eddie, sorry, just quickly, Eddie is from the mountain area of Western Sydney and Sheila is from Southwest Sydney, Cabra, Canley area. And so her work, she's more of a writer than an artist, but I feel so incredibly inspired by Sheila's work. She's like a phenomenal wearer of many hats, whether she's like writing, researching, curating, doing community programming, like phenomenal. I feel very inspired by her work. She has many different outcomes, but I guess does a lot of writing and research. I would look into her work. Sheila's amazing. Roberta Joy Rich isn't from Western Sydney, but is from Naarm and is part of the South African diaspora, uses a lot of archival research in her work, photo media and storytelling to kind of interrogate like race, gender, imperialism, and deconstructing a lot of that. And so I met Roberta through the UTP Counterflows project. Please check out Roberta's work. She's phenomenal as well. And finally, not an emerging artist, but a huge mentor to me has been Khaled Sabsabi. And I definitely wouldn't be here today and I wouldn't be where I am in my practice without Khaled's guidance. And so I really, wanted to be able to acknowledge this as Khaled is for so many people in our community, so many artists. It's just, phenomenal to think about how many practices, in particular emerging practices, have started, developed into mid-career, been supported, not just artists, arts workers, community members, everyone who has been supported by Khaled's work and practice. So I really want to finish here and say thank you to Khaled for all your work.
Amazing.
Thank you so much. I think that's all me, and it's back to Emma and Jane. But before I be quiet, a huge thank you to Emma and Jane, Therese, Erin, and Dean, and Donna. Thank you all for all your help with today. It's been incredible, and again, thank you all for joining in. Keep making.
Thank you, Jill. We actually have a really good question. I don't know if you want to answer it, Jill.
Yeah.
I know we're over time, but okay, if you're cool to answer it. It's from Kumari. I'll read it out. In this time of increased suppression of decolonizing narratives in creative work, how do you stay true to your ethics and vision and not be totally suppressed/erased? Big question.
That is a great question, and man, I feel like it's almost like a statement that we should end on instead of me talking about it. But it's something that I'm still working out, particularly at a time where locally and globally things it fills me with such despair, and it feels difficult to think about making in a time like this. But I think it's I don't know, it's also it's an extra reason to make. And it really solidifies for me the importance of being an artist, to both raise awareness, to be the voice for people who don't have voices, or to create perspectives, to create alternative histories, to reauthor those stories, or create these alternative archives that, even if they kind of feel like maybe right now aren't hitting in the way that you want them to, think about your future self, think about future communities, our future leaders, or I don't know how we want to think back on this period of time and be able to create work that responds to that. I don't know if that's a proper answer, but I feel like they're the feelings that come out when I think about why it's important to make, even if it feels uncomfortable and it feels difficult to make work right now. That's kind of what I'm telling myself. And also just being with community is more important than ever. I think just keep making, keep talking to community, and I don't know, keep making for your future self and those future communities. Never be afraid. Just make the work you want. I don't know. That's what I'm going to leave it. I hope that's helpful.
Love it. Thank you, Jill. Kamari also put in the chat, use your art to fight, which is a quote from Arundhati Roy.
Love that. Thank you, Kamari.
Thank you. Sorry that we're over time 5 minutes, but we'll quickly wrap up with just a few of Nava's contact details. I hope that through this session, you can kind of see how artists like Jill kind of use the code to help support parts of their practice. And it definitely comes in handy the further you progress along your journey. Yes, please check out the code when you can. If you're interested in joining Nava membership, the information is available on our website, nava.net.au. We've got different membership tiers at different costs. And then we have our contact details on the next slide as well. So you can call us at certain hours of the day. We have a call window time from 9 to 10 a.m. and 2 to 4 p.m. So any help that you need, we're here to answer. And you can also reach us by email. We're pretty responsive on there too. And then UTP's contact details, Jane.
Tune in, guys. We've got some information coming about the year ahead and what's happening. Some of that's been announced now, but keep in touch to hear more coming from us.
And this is just a QR code to our survey. I think Donna's also pasted the link in the chat. If people can please fill out the survey so that we can run more of these sessions in the future, that would be amazing. Let us know if there's anything you want us to improve or future topics that you want us to explore. Thank you. Big thank you to Jill for such a generous session. it was amazing. Like so many things that Jane and I are going to be learning from this as well. Stay tuned for our next area coded session, which will be in April, 24th of April with Marikit, who's a mid-career artist. So yeah, we're just going to continue building on, Jill's session, Grace's session last week. Would be great to see you there.
Thanks for joining, everyone. Have a good hour.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.